TorahCafe.com.
Hi everybody, I'm very excited to be here. I want to thank Chabad and all the people who were involved in setting up this live stream. So hi to everybody that's watching us live, and of course hi to everybody that's watching us after we go live on the video that was recorded. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and about what this video is all about. So I'd like to thank Chabad for actually coming down to my office to do this here at my office. My business is actually a company called Blue Switch. So I've been in business, my company has been in business since the year 2000. We develop apps, we do websites, we do online marketing, everything and anything to do with tech. I've been doing tech my whole life. I started when I was 9 years old, 40 now, so it's been a ride. I was the kid that when everybody was out playing football, I was sitting in front of a computer pecking away. I like to say that I was a geek before it was cool to be a geek. I like to say that it's cool now, because if I say it enough, then I think it does become cool. So I was that kid. That's the one. So I mean, it's nice that now I get to use that in business, and I could use that as my livelihood, which is great. So some years ago, I guess due to my experience and being from Yid, it was recommended that I find out more about this organization, an organization called TAG. And it was about 4 or 5 years ago that I found out a little bit more about it. I met with the founders, Rabbi Moshe Drew and Rabbi Nechemia Gottlieb, and I was really blown away. I didn't know what to expect at the time, but after meeting them, it wasn't at all what I expected. So when I met Rabbi Moshe Drew, for example, I said, well, what would you do for a guy like me? A guy like me, I'm a hacker. I could get past any filter. You know, these filters on the computer don't mean anything to me. So tag is worthless for a guy like me. And he smiled and he said, you don't really understand what our mission is. He said, I'm not here to try to lock you up. I'm not here to try to do something to you against your will. That's not what TAG's mission is at all. TAG is here for you so that you could be the person that you want to be. So that means that we're going to make your online life match your offline life. Just like there are things that you wouldn't do offline or that you don't want to have access to offline, we're here to help you do that online. Not because we're policemen, but because that's what you want in your life to grow and to make your life safe. And so I had a complete paradigm shift when I heard that. And I said, that makes so much sense. So it's not about somebody being a policeman, it's about me growing and me choosing. And he said, in fact, after you set up your filters, you could call TAG at any time. You could take off your filters. You could tweak your filters. So from that moment on, I was basically sold. And I basically bought into that concept, which is we're here to help people, the organization is here to help people grow on their terms. Since that time, TAG is an organization, so I'm actually one of the directors of the Flatbush office of TAG. TAG stands for Technology Awareness Group. So this organization was started in Lakewood, but it has grown tremendously. So as I mentioned, I'm from the Flatbush office in Brooklyn. And just in Brooklyn alone, we have 3 offices. We have an office in Flatbush, there's an office in Williamsburg, and there's an office in Borough Park. There's, at this point, I've lost count. It's maybe 36 offices worldwide. Forgive me, Rav Nechemia and Rav Moshe, if I get it wrong. It's 34, 36, 40 maybe. And there's basically a TAG office in every major city around the world that has any sort of Jewish population. And it's really great because all of the offices work together and they interact, which is great because we can share ideas, we can share stories, we can talk about best practices. It makes all of us greater than just the individual or the individual office. So me, I've been lucky to work with many different institutions. I guess it's because of my background. I'm not the traditional, I'm not a Rav, obviously. So I'm not here to talk about anything to do with halacha or anything to do with spirituality. I may mention some things with spirituality, but that's not my forte. I like to say I'm the Shabbos Goy of TAG. I'm a regular businessman, and I could talk a lot about technology, but as I said, the rabbinic stuff is not my forte. So I'm not here to say what's usher and what's mutter. Everybody has their Rav. I'll leave that to everybody else to go to their Rav to ask them their questions. For me, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the technical. I'll mention I had my 15 minutes of fame about 2 years ago when I was interviewed after I had spoken for TEG. It was, I believe, in Montreal, and I was interviewed by a writer in Mishpacha magazine, Shirley Besser. And Shirley said, you're an interesting guy. I'd love to meet you, and I'd love to interview you. I tried to convince him out of it because, I am that geek. I'm not really that interesting at all. But he decided to come, and in the course of our conversations, he had mentioned, a question of, does the frum world have to worry about identity theft? And I mentioned that we did. To make a long story short, he told me something like, well, I mentioned that I had hacked before, and he said, well, you couldn't hack me if you tried. And I said, yeah, I could hack you. And he said, okay, so I challenge you, and if you do it, I'm going to put you on the cover of the magazine. So I didn't think too much of it at the time, but sure enough, after he had left, he started sending me these trash talk emails, and I'm hyper competitive, type A personality, hyper competitive. And so after a while, I said, I got to teach him a lesson. Make a long story short, I did hack him, Shirley, if you're watching. It was fun. We had fun, and I was successful with the hack. And as a footnote to the story, it was actually very interesting. My wife told me, now that you hacked him, you better make sure that they don't put you on the cover. She wants us always to maintain, humility at all costs. My wife's an amazing person. She's a tremendous balas chesed. She gets it from my in-laws, who are tremendous balei chesed. My mother-in-law started a cancer center in Brooklyn, community cancer center, to help the frum world with, unfortunately, with a lot of the cancer that goes on. And they do an unbelievable job of staying out of the spotlight. So my wife said the same thing to me. And I called Shirley and said, Shirley, obviously, I don't think that you were putting me on the cover. And this is a very uncomfortable conversation because, it's going to sound like I won this. But it's a shalom bias issue. And my wife asked me to mention it. And Shirley tells me, Cham Ovadia Yosef, at the time, I'm from the Sephardic community, so of course Cham Ovadia is a major name to us. Cham Ovadia Zatzal, he said, he just passed away. Don't you think we have anyone better to put on the cover? I was pretty embarrassed. Well, of course, I went back to my wife, screaming. A few weeks later, the magazine came out, and sure enough, I was on the cover, and I called Shirley and said, Shirley, what's going on? I thought we had a deal. And he said, ha ha ha, tell your wife I made you a rock star. Don't worry about it. So that was my 15 minutes of my claim to fame in the Jewish world. So from that time on a positive note, a lot of organizations reached out to me. They had read the article, they had heard about me, and I guess I come from a different angle, not the usual angle, so it was very interesting. I'm going to try to bring some of that here right now, some of my experience, some of the questions that I've received, and some of the questions that are being sent to us. When I look down, I'm just looking up the questions that have been sent. So, and I'm going to lead off actually with this question. This was a common question. I believe that people can email, anyone who wants to email the questions. The email address is live@tegflatbush.com. Again, it's live, L-I-V-E, at teg, T-A-G, Flatbush, F-L-A-T-B-U-S-H.com. I believe it's on the screen. I'm not totally sure if it's on the screen. If it's not, again, it's live@tegflatbush.com. Don't be afraid. Email the questions. If I don't get to them now, hopefully somebody will respond to you via email with your questions. So could you please explain some of the negative effects of smartphones? And another question which I thought would be connected is there a difference of what should be allowed for different ages? So I think by now, mostly everybody should know somewhat of what the dangers are. So if I had to boil it down, I would say there's basically three different general areas of concern that we have when it comes to smartphones, and it's internet in general. Smartphones is just one angle, one avenue. But when we talk about the dangers, we're really talking about any internet-enabled device. So that could be smartphones, it could be laptop computers, it could be tablets, it could be game consoles. If you have an Xbox that's connected to the internet, your risks are really the same. And where the risks come in fall under, let's say, three major categories. So one area of concern, of course, which everybody knows is, let's say, inappropriate, explicit material. lack of a better term, schmutz and things related to that, and how that affects everybody. Another area of concern is social media. When we talk about social media, we're talking about Facebook, Instagram, and we're going to talk a little bit about, what the dangers are connected with those. Thirdly, I would say it's the communication risks, and I'm including in that just basic things like texting, WhatsApp, I guess maybe Snapchat falls under that. And if you don't know what these things are, hopefully, if I have enough time, I'm going to get to them. Not sure how much time we have, but the crew here will signal me if I start to talk too much and I go over. So each area of concern brings with it its own dangers. If we talk about texting, for example, one of the most common questions I get when I speak publicly, I open the forum to questions. I always get the question of, well, what could be wrong with WhatsApp? There's nothing wrong with WhatsApp. What could be wrong with texting? My son, my daughter. So one of the things I'd like to mention, I'm going to be talking in general about these dangers. We need to really realize that we're kind of all in the same boat here. This is not about our parents. It's not about our children. It's about us. Of course, that lends itself to being about our children and about our parents. But nobody should think that, this is only about my children. It's not only about your children. Because if you're not doing something in your life, then certainly your children are not going to be doing anything in their lives. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be, doing things for our children and setting the boundaries for our children, maybe even going further than we do for ourselves. But it does mean that we need to look at ourselves and take a look at ourselves and our families to see what we can do for each one of us. Excuse me a second. So, as I mentioned, what could be wrong with WhatsApp? So, what I'm seeing now, I've been in my business, as I mentioned, since the year 2000. Before that, I had another business. We merged in the year 2000. What's happening now, especially with the younger generation, kids who grow up with texting and with WhatsApp, it really ends up being their primary method of communication. And it's even more than that, because when you're texting, let's say psychologists have keyed the term the online disinhibition effect. Online disinhibition effect. We're not communicating and we're not interacting with a person face to face. It's very, very different than a face-to-face communication. It's different. I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying it's worse. But one thing it doesn't have is when I'm speaking and I'm texting and I'm WhatsApping, I'm not seeing that other person and I'm not getting visual cues. So that means that I can say something. I don't see facial cues. I don't know how that person's reacting. How many times have we sent a text message that was totally benign, or we meant it totally benign, but the other person took it very negatively? And next thing you know, you're in a fight with your spouse or your friend because you sent them a text message. It was meant to be a joke, or it was meant totally differently, but the person took it in a very negative light. Those things in real life don't happen as often, because if somebody sees me, if I'm interacting with somebody and I say something that's benign, I have a smile on my face, we can talk, that doesn't usually happen. Or let's say another example. And this is an example I like to give to some of the younger people when I speak at some of the schools and the meisters. So I'll say, how many of us have used LOL? Well, now it's out of fashion. But we've all in the past used LOL, which means laugh out loud, or laughing out loud. But how many of us have ever laughed when sending LOL? Never, right? It's actually never happened. It's almost come to the point where we say LOL and we look like this. LOL. That's how we do it. And so what happens when, especially the younger generation, and the reason I mention the younger generation is because as adults, we've developed our communication skills to a certain extent. We're set in a certain pattern. We have our ways. We've had that development, whereas the younger generation that's developing it for the first time, they're developing it with these tools at the same time. So they're developing this concept of, I'm going to tell my friend that I'm laughing and I'm really not. And they'll do that on a constant basis. So they're training themselves to really say one thing and feel another. They're training themselves to say something and not care that much about how the other person is taking it. And what happens when they're constantly doing this? So there's an element of skill that's missing. That's number one. Personal skills, communication skills are being lost. That's number one. Number two, the boundaries are kind of getting blurred. So whereas I wouldn't necessarily say something in real life because maybe I wouldn't want to see that feedback, I would get, maybe I would get hurt or I feel bad for making another person feel bad. I don't necessarily have those red lines when it comes to texting or WhatsApping. And I may do that. And that's where the online disinhibition effect comes from. I'm less inhibited. Take that to the next level. What the types of things that I text? It's very easy for me to say, I would never want somebody, I would never take, let's say, a photo album of mine, a personal photo album of mine, and hand it to somebody and say, here you go, here's my photo album, go crazy, right? I wouldn't do that. It's private. But I have no qualms with texting pictures all the time. Why is that? So the answer is because we all have this feeling of, well, it's not real, it's kind of, I'm anonymous. I can do whatever I want. I'm sending it to a friend. What could really be wrong with that? And that's not even to even mention the whole concept of WhatsApp. If we talk about WhatsApp for a second, where we have WhatsApp groups and we have admins of WhatsApp groups, and who's the admin and who's allowed in the WhatsApp group and who's not allowed in the WhatsApp group. I say, Baruch Hashem, I'm not in school right now in this age because I wouldn't be able to hack it. Because like I said, I was that geek who wasn't playing football. Imagine a kid like me, I wasn't going to be invited into all the WhatsApp groups. Those admins were not going to allow me in. I was going to be the guy not allowed in the group. Or if I was allowed in the group, I was going to get thrown out of the group. The pressure, the unbelievable pressure of being in the groups and not being in the group and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and it's all based on one of the random other young people in that WhatsApp group. And if we take it a step further, where does that lead? So it's not uncommon anymore to have people texting, at 3 a.m. because that's their primary method of communication, and that's how they express themselves. So that's texting, a little intro to texting. Let's talk for a second about social media. We'll build up. Social media, very, very simply, so we have an idea of texting. It blurs the lines of what's right and what's wrong, what our inhibitions are, where we cross the line. So we could take it to the next level with social media. Social media, in a nutshell, social media is the concept of taking what's private and making it public and celebrating it. That's exactly what social media is. We don't have to look further than our president. Our president who tweets everything that goes on. He may be watching a television show, or he is based on what he says, and he'll just tweet about it. So whereas a person normally would have an experience something in life, a personal experience, a private experience, might even be something in public, and they might have that experience, they may tell a friend about it later. We're so hyper-connected now, and especially with social media, that we instantly tweet it, or we post it on Instagram. And it may be moments later that we say, wait a second, what did I do? Maybe I shouldn't have texted. Maybe I shouldn't have posted that. Maybe I shouldn't have tweeted that. We don't have to look further than, our own politicians. Look at how much trouble certain politicians have gotten into because they've posted without thinking, because it's just second nature. I'll just tweet it. I'll take that private thing and make it public. And all of a sudden, when people respond and go, oh my gosh, what was that? We take a step back and go, wait a second. I shouldn't have done that, maybe. That's social media. The third area is really, as I mentioned before, the explicit material, the schmutz. This used to be a problem that was affected mostly men, but it's really men and women these days. And anyone who has unfiltered internet, anybody, I don't care who you are, forgive me for saying it, it could be a Rosh Yeshiva, it could be a child. Anyone who has unfiltered internet is going to be seeing schmutz. If you have unfiltered internet, if your husbands or your wives have unfiltered internet, there's absolutely no question your children, if they haven't yet, they will, unfortunately. There's no question that there's going to be schmutz. So what does that mean, especially for our younger generation? Scientists, psychologists will tell us that children, especially children that see it at a very young age, it could change the trajectory of their life. I work with adults right now. I have cases that I work with of adults who are addicted to schmutz. This is something that has ripped apart families. It rips apart marriages. It breaks families. It's destroying children in every community, from the most frum to the least frum. I've worked with all of them. Could it have been avoided? Absolutely. It's not to say we're foolproof. To go back to what Rav Moshe Drew said, he gave me an interesting story, and he said there was a case of a frum group who, as a group, were being monitored. They agreed to be monitored. So they had unfiltered internet, but monitored. And this group agreed to have all of their web browsing, especially if they would go to something inappropriate, to a specific Rav. And it happened where there was a case of somebody who was being interviewed in the news, whatever. So this group ended up all looking up the story. That story apparently had an ad on the page leading to something else that led to something else that was schmutz. An overwhelming majority clicked on it. And the question is, why would they click on the schmutz? It makes no sense. They know they're being monitored. They know the Rav's going to find out. And the answer is because if they reach that stage, credit once again to Rav Moshe Drew on this one, if they reach that stage where they see that pop-up ad or where they see that schmutzy, today we call it clickbait. If they see that clickbait, they're going to click on it. And it's understood that nobody is going to withstand that nisayon. The goal is to reach a point where we're not in that nisayon, right? So that I'm not presented with that clickbait that I have to say, oh, I'm not going to click on it. We're all human. We know, we're all in the same boat here. The goal is to try to make our lives a little safer so that we're not presented with it in the first place. So I think those three, I think we answered the question with that. Can you please explain some of the negative effects of the smartphone? I think we answered it. And is there a difference which should be allowed for different ages? And this, absolutely. There was an article in the New York Times even recently, not to quote the New York Times per se, but happened to be an article in the New York Times that talked about, it was interviewing psychologists and different people in the field, and it was talking about what age to get children cell phones. And I'm not going to paraphrase, but at the end of the day, the article basically was saying, as late as possible. Try to delay it and get the children as late as possible for all the reasons that I mentioned. It's noteworthy to say that, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends absolutely filters on all internet devices for this reason, because again, when children are exposed to these things, as adults, we've kind of developed a lot of the skills and a lot of communication skills, a lot of the how to deal with a lot of these things. Children don't have that, and especially, for example, with schmutz, kids who see that stuff at a very young age, those are the kids that are most at risk when they become adults. So jumping here to another question, is there anything I should be aware of about a class WhatsApp group? So yes, absolutely there's something to be aware of. So as I mentioned, WhatsApp, obviously, and I should say this in general, I'm not here to bash technology. I'm addicted to technology, which is why I do what I do with Tag. By the way, my filter is doing things like this. I'm not getting paid for doing this. I don't get paid for going and speaking at the yeshivas where I go, at the events I go to. I don't ask for payment. And the reason I don't ask for payment is because, once again, Rav Moshe Drew assured me that this is my filter. My filter for a guy like me is to speak out and to be involved, and that's why I do it. But I'm not here to bash technology. It's really the opposite. I have a different smartwatch every single day. I'm the guy who pitches his tent outside the Apple store so I could get the newest iPhone or get the latest Android device. I need to have all of it. When I was once at a meetup with Rav Nechemia where he was presenting and I was presenting right after, and he was talking about how the refrigerators these days are connected and they have internet. And while he was talking, I was totally Googling it because I was like, I'm definitely going to buy that refrigerator. So I'm a technology addict. I'm not here to us or anything, like I said, or say that it's bad or good. I'm going to let my viewers, I'm going to let you out there decide what's allowed and what's not allowed. Speak to your rabbanim. It's different for everybody. I'm just here to talk about what the dangers are so that we're all on the same page. So a class WhatsApp group. So I understand that there are classes and it's becoming very, very easy for classes and classmates to interact. I've heard of teachers being on the groups. Again, you're taking a child whose maturity level is whatever it is. You're giving this child power over all the other children in the form of being an admin, for example. Is that child ready? Are they responsible enough for that responsibility? They're not going to cyberbully, or alternatively, when other kids cyberbully. One of the things I like to do is I do these surveys of some of the students and some of the young adults that I work with. I do it to parents as well. And one of the statements that they had to vote on was this: I've seen a friend recently get attacked in a group chat. It's usually over 75% of them say yes, they've seen a friend recently get attacked in a group chat. The follow-up question is, when my friend was getting attacked in a group chat, I stepped in and tried to stop it. And it's almost nothing. Who has the power? Who has the enough of self-confidence to go against the grain when they see a friend getting attacked and they don't want to be the one that's getting attacked? I'm going to step in and be the guy. So we wouldn't take our car keys, right? We wouldn't take our car keys and toss them to our child and say, "Here you go, son." Let's say they got their license and they're 17 or wherever you are, wherever age. I think they should raise the age personally, whatever. But imagine your child finally gets their license. You're not going to go and toss the keys and say, "Hey, good luck." You're going to sit with your child. You're going to talk it over. First of all, they're a certain age, and there's going to be rules, and there's going to be a discussion about it. You're not just going to throw the keys and say, "Good luck." Now, imagine going to, I've seen 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds with WhatsApp. Does that make any sense to us? Why are we okay, or why do we view it as totally acceptable to have rules and regulations and to sit down with our children and go over it, or with things with Yiddishkeit? We could be going on vacation somewhere or going somewhere and talking about kashrus with our children and saying, these are the rules and make sure these are the hechsherim that we accept, these are the ones that we don't, and this is what you have to be careful of. Why would we do that in the rest of our life, but not in technology, when we know how dangerous technology is and all the dangers that it leads to? Texting while driving is more dangerous right now, kills more people than drunk driving. And yet, when it comes to drunk driving, we may be, of course, drunk driving is, super dangerous. Texting while driving is more dangerous. Are we teaching our kids? When we hand the car keys to our children, are we talking to them about obeying the rules of the road? Or are we talking to them about technology and saying, don't text while driving, it's not that important? Why are they texting while driving, we should ask. One of the questions I ask and I survey is, when I get a text message or a WhatsApp, I find it extremely difficult not to answer right away. 80% will say yes. They get that text. There's that desire, that burning desire to respond right away. And of course, texting while driving is dangerous. Of course it is, because when we're getting that text, we can't control ourselves. We can't control ourselves from responding right away. But are we doing what we need to do as parents? So a class WhatsApp group, again, I'm not here to say whether it's right or wrong. Maybe someone will counter and say, well, what if the admin is a teacher and a teacher is moderating? Maybe I'll let you discuss it with your schools. I'm here to talk about the dangers and what I see. I get calls constantly about cyberbullying on WhatsApp, being left out, being attacked. Is there a way to do it safe? Possibly. Again, we'll let you decide. Let's look for another question. What is inappropriate about a social media site like Instagram or Facebook? So we talked a little bit about that. I'll add to it from what we said before. Instagram and Facebook, I get a lot of people saying, well, I have a private account. My wife my daughter has a private Instagram account, so therefore there's nothing wrong with that. So there is, because Instagram, first of all, is not only about your friends and whether your profile is private or not. You have access to everybody else that's public. So anyone who's going on Instagram, they're seeing everybody else. Sometimes it's celebrities. It could be the guy down the street. It could be a person in Australia. It could be anyone, anywhere. And it's whatever they feel like posting. And again, the concept is to take what's private and make it public. Are those the values that we're seeing in the rest of the world? The values that celebrities espouse, are those our values? Forget about Yiddishkeit for a second. Just as being a moral human being, are those the values? Of course, our morality comes from Torah, but again, I'm not qualified to talk Torah. But just values. We look at the world and we look at what's going on. We look at the stories that come out constantly and the things that are coming out on social media. Are those the values that we want for our families? So even our children that have private accounts, they're interacting and they're espousing that same ideology. That ideology of what's private should be public from now on. What happens when they're constantly thinking of that? Where does it lead when our children constantly feel like what's private should be public? So how many of our children today realize that when something is digital, it's there forever? How many of our children understand that if they text something to a friend or they post something to Instagram privately, it's there forever? Oh, you could delete it, you could try to delete it, but it's never deleted. Once it's digital, it never goes away. It's backed up somewhere, it was retweeted, or someone else texted it to somebody else. It's there forever. That means the stakes are super, super high. That means that before we really, if you think about it, before we text anything or post anything on social media, and again, I know people do it for business. I myself, I'm guilty. I do social media marketing here in this office. But for us, how much more responsible do we have to be? Think twice before posting anything and texting anything because it's there forever. And how much more so our children seeing inside to the private lives of other people, of other random people, people that we would never look to for any concept of morality. What is the problem with Snapchat? So we didn't really talk about Snapchat. I know Snapchat is, very popular now. For those that don't know, Snapchat is a way to communicate where whatever I send to the other person gets deleted automatically. So once again, this app was created again so that people would be less inhibited. So any last shred of dignity gets thrown away, and I'll do whatever. I wouldn't normally send this, but hey, it's going to get deleted anyway. But as I mentioned, nothing really goes away. Nothing really ever gets deleted. Of course, the other person could take a snapshot, or they could take a picture with another device. I see it with kids, a lot of kids using Snapchat because it's great because their teachers and their parents don't see what they're doing if they look at their phone. So again, it's that same concept, just like with social media, it's the less inhibitions. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Why does it become a school responsibility and not just left to the parents? That's an excellent question. So we personally, specifically in the Flatbush office of TAG, have been working with a lot of schools. And the reason we do is because it doesn't really work when one of the kids in the class is on the program and the rest aren't. Because the kids interact, like we mentioned, there's class WhatsApp groups, there's texting, there's everything that goes on, play dates. So it doesn't really work for us when we do great things with, let's say, one family, and then that child goes to the other house that's completely unfiltered, and then they end up having access and seeing things that they shouldn't see, seeing schmutz or what have you. So when we work with a school, it gives us two benefits. Number one, it gives us a way to get everybody on the same page, to make it safer for everybody, including all of the children. That's A. B, it really helps for the school to really share with their parents what their guidelines are, what their hashkafa is, the standards, because every school and every organization does have standards, right? We all have standards, just like we have kashrus organizations that have standards. So too our schools and other parents. It helps other parents to know what those standards are and to know that the other houses are safe as well. And I could be sending my child to another place that's following certain standards. You wouldn't send your child to someone's house if you knew that they weren't Shomer Shabbos, right? Or that they didn't keep kashrus, right? So why are we so careful when it comes to those things, but we're not careful when it comes to technology? We know that technology is, it's the sign of the generation. So why not give the same credence to technology that we would to kashrus? Next question here. Let's see. What could I tell my child who tells me that all her friends have Instagram and she will be left out if she doesn't have it? So that question could really apply to anything. And again, I get this all the time as well. What can I tell my child? All their friends have it. So I just mentioned, that's really why we're working with the schools. So if your child does come to you and say, well, it's not fair, all my friends have it, why do I have to be left out? My answer is then you have work to do. Your job at that point is to work with the school and work with the other parents. It's a valid taina from your child. It is a valid concern, and you should take it seriously. And if your child says it, get on the phone, work with the school, work with the other parents, and get a policy in place. Get guidelines in place. Have them work towards building something so that your child isn't the only one, because how can we expect our children to be able to withstand the peer pressure and the social pressure when everybody else is not on the same page? And you know what? It also goes for our own family lives. If we're not setting limits and setting guidelines, as I mentioned in the beginning, in our own homes, our children are going to pick up on that as well, and they're not going to want to accept that or set guidelines in life. And that's going to go through until they become adults. Unfortunately, I've asked many parents, I've surveyed parents, and the statement that I've presented has been, my spouse, this is husbands and wives in a discussion, my spouse will often ignore me or the kids because they're texting. I see that 75-80% say yes. What message are we sending our children when our children are trying to speak to us and we're texting instead of responding, instead of talking to them? They pick up on those things. We're teaching them that this is what's important. The texting is what's important. And our kids are growing up with that philosophy. And so, of course, they're not going to be able to withstand. And, of course, they're, God forbid, going to fall. So it starts with us. It starts with us. It starts with our families. We need to have a policy for our homes. We need to share it. Then we need to take it and discuss it with the teachers, discuss it with the school. Get involved. Get involved with your child's yeshiva. Get involved with other parents. What would cause a frum girl to text on Shabbos? When I first started with TAG, again, Rabbi Drew and I were going back and forth, and he told me, there's this problem. There are people in your community, there's children who are texting on Shabbos. And I said, impossible. We're a traditional community. We do other things wrong maybe as a community, and there's different levels of frumkeit, but nobody's texting on Shabbos. How wrong I was. Unfortunately, I've now been educated and I've experienced more. Texting on Shabbos is becoming, unfortunately, more and more common. How could a child end up texting on Shabbos? In the words of Rabbi Moshe Drew, if a child has their primary method of communication becoming texting, when you ask them not to text on Shabbos, you're asking them to make a Tanis Dibur. He asked me at the time, have you ever made a Tanis Dibur? No. So how could you expect your children to do it? If you can't do it, this is how they express themselves. It's too difficult for them to not do it on Shabbos. It's almost like Einus. How could you expect them not to text on Shabbos if that's the whole way that they communicate all the time? it also has to do with addiction, and it also has to do with inhibitions and the lack of inhibitions. When it comes to other things, let's say alcohol or smoking, those of us who have had alcohol in our lives or smoked in our lives, we know let's talk about alcohol. If you take 4 or 5 shots, one after the other right in a row, your body has a reaction to it, right? We feel it right away. You may get drunk, you may get sick after. A person who gets drunk and gets sick, it's going to be a while before they get drunk again, right? So what's the biological reaction to overdoing it with texting? There is no biological reaction. We don't feel anything. We just keep texting. So children that do it and they just keep texting and just keep texting, they don't have a biological reaction. They don't know. Their body doesn't tell them enough. So before they know it, they end up, quote unquote, in the realm of addiction. Scientists have looked at this. They've tested it. They've done MRIs on people with this. They've seen dopamine. Dopamine is released in the brain, just like with drugs. So of course they're going to text on Shabbos, whether it be because it's their primary method of communication or whether it be because it has evolved into an addiction for them. The answer is making sure we put enough safeguards in place that it doesn't lead to that level. Why do we need tag if we can use Apple's controls for free? Okay, good question. So first of all, there's that question in and of itself is leading to a misconception about tag. Tag doesn't charge for the service. We don't charge anything. As I mentioned, I'm not getting paid for doing this right now, and I don't get paid when I service people's phones or devices. Tag does not charge anything. Sometimes Tag will recommend a filter that has a cost. In those cases, you're buying a piece of software from a business, a company, and that's why you're paying them. We're not charging you anything. You're paying money to the business. And between you and me, you and I, everyone out there, you want to be buying it from a business because if you're buying it from a business, there's accountability, there's someone to turn to for tech support, there's accountability. You want to be working with a business because you know you're getting quality. Not every solution costs money. Some of them do. The second part of that is, why should we call tag if we could do it ourselves? Yes, you could do it yourselves. There are things you could do yourselves. How much do you know? Do you know the ins and outs? Do you know where the holes are? Do you know where the dangers are? Are you so confident? The stakes are very high, like we said. Are you so confident with your own skills that you're willing to do it yourself and not use the free service of a tag technician to do it the right way? Does the company charge per phone number or family? So again, as was mentioned, the charges vary depending on what solution is given. There are many solutions that cost nothing. There are solutions that cost per device. There are solutions that cost per family. It all depends on what level of filtering you're getting. And you determine that by speaking to a tag representative, explaining what you need, and working with them to come up with the right solution for you. If my daughter is a trustworthy young lady, why do I need controls and filters? So, the number one thing, with every family that I've ever worked with where technology has caused tragedy in the family, the number one thing that the parents would say is, I can't believe it happened to my child. I can't believe it happened in my family. My daughter is such a good girl. She's the most frumman of our class. She reads Tillim all day. I can't believe it. Or my son, he's such a good learner. He's the best in his class. He's top of his class. How could this happen to my family? The number one statement that is made by every family, lo alenu, that has had bad things happen. Our children are great. We say every morning, Neshama she'atata bi Torah. Our neshamas are pure. We know that. Our children are pure. And the younger they are, the purer they are. The point is we want to keep them pure. What do you think is going to happen to a child, a curious young child, who's using the internet very innocently? And the internet and all of the other companies, including my own, who are marketing, we know what sells. There's nothing anymore that doesn't have some element of pritzis or schmutz. I mean, sports. Everybody talks about sports, and sports are healthy for a child to be involved in sports. Absolutely. But what goes on during halftime? What are we seeing? What are our children seeing? And again, I'm I'm not here to talk about sports one way or the other. I happen to not be a sports fan because I'm a geek. But sports could be great. But we see the tie-in of Pritzis and Shmutz with sports. So when a child has unfettered access, they're naturally going to be curious. You can't blame that child. Of course, when they see something, they're going to be curious and they're going to start searching. People talk about Wikipedia. And Wikipedia, it's a great resource for finding out all kinds of information. It's a free encyclopedia. Yes, but Wikipedia also has every word in the world will have an article, and it may have video. So that means anything you could think of in your brain, you can look up on Wikipedia and see a video for it. That means our children may hear something on the street and say, hey, I wonder what that means, and just search for it. Are we prepared? Are we confident that our 9 and 10-year-olds, if they have access, are mature enough to be able to process a video that they will see? I can answer that. No, they're not mature enough. Doctors have said they're not mature enough. They're going to get messed up for life. Our children are trustworthy. We want, as I mentioned from the beginning, we want to protect those of us who have these morals. We want to put things in place so that we're not tested and our children aren't tested. We want to keep us safe. As they get older, as there was the other question of different ages, maybe as they get older, there's less restrictions. That's, again, up to you, your Rav, your school. But again, we want to keep our children who are pure, we want to keep them that way. If my daughter has no access to YouTube or a browser, what other apps are inappropriate and why? So one of the rule of thumb is this. If your child is going to have a device, or the school is allowing the devices, whether it be an iPod Touch, whether it be a tablet, what have you. Obviously, I'm here to condone filters. I'm with TAG. But aside from filters, number one, any app that's going on a device, there can be no app installed without reading the reviews. You must read the reviews. See what people are saying. Number two, look at the age recommendation. Not that that tells us if it's appropriate, but certainly if it's 17 plus, if the goyim are telling us that 17, you have to be 17, kal v'chomer us, we have to accept that. That's number two. Number three, we need to test them. We need to test the apps ourselves. Test it out for ourselves and see, is there anything inappropriate? More often than not, apps that seem to be totally benign very often have dangers in them. For example, there was an app that was targeted towards children, and it was rated age 4 plus. This app lets you make collages with pictures. One of the things this app allowed you to do was import videos from YouTube. So believe it or not, if you go to YouTube, if a child were to go to YouTube, if they search for something inappropriate, YouTube actually prompts you to prove your age, to prove that you're over 17. But if a child was using this app that's rated age 4, that had this YouTube integration, they were able to search YouTube completely unfiltered. Now, it's worth mentioning, just because YouTube prompts you to prove your age doesn't mean that that's safe, because it only takes a few clicks to get around that, or to use a different account to get around YouTube's age restriction. And there's tremendously bad things on YouTube. YouTube has great things. In fact, this video may be hosted by YouTube right now. YouTube has great things. YouTube has absolute pornography. There's no question. Sometimes you have to be creative in finding it. And that's the same thing for much of social media. Twitter is loaded with schmutz. Instagram, officially the policy is no schmutz, but there's things that we would probably consider schmutz. And it's constantly being thrown in our faces. So just because they don't have access to a browser, shutting Safari on an iPhone doesn't mean the child doesn't have access to anything else. In fact, almost every app these days has built-in in-app browsers. So if you didn't filter the phone properly, it's just a matter of going into another app, and then you have complete unfiltered internet access. If that's the case, then what we need to do for ourselves and our family is make sure that everything that we're doing as a family is being discussed, the guidelines are clear, and we are aware of what all of us are doing as a family. The middle initial of TAG, which brings us full circle. I know I'm going a little long, TAG is an organization that's here to help. First and foremost, we're here to create awareness. We're here to bring these elements to the forefront so that it's not swept under the rug, because it's really important. There are people suffering, Klal Yisrael suffering. It's not even Klal Yisrael. The Goyim, the whole world is suffering. There were studies that were done. The more people are involved with things like Facebook, the more unhappy they become. These are studies that were done by the Goyish world, not us. There was a famous study that came out from Great Britain that talked about how over 50% of divorces in, I believe, 2013 or 2014, this is already a few years ago, cited Facebook as being one of the factors in the divorce. So where does that leave us? So this is where it leaves us. Wherever you are, whoever's watching, most likely there's a TAG office that you can contact. If not, you can start with us. Again, you can email us live at tagflatbush.com. Even after the program, you could email us and we will help you get in contact with that organization. If you would like to send a question to me personally, again, you can feel free to send the email. I'll do my best to respond. Get involved. The A in TAG stands for awareness. The most important thing, if we're going to overcome this test, is for us to create awareness among ourselves and among our schools, our families, our schools, our community centers, what have you. If you don't do it and you don't get involved, nobody is going to do it. And unfortunately, there's going to be more. God forbid our children should be part of the statistics. That's what we don't want. TAG is here ready to help for free, to give of our time, to guide you, and to give you technical service. Where many times we'll collaborate, we'll find out questions, we'll come back to you. If you have a game console in the house, you need to have filtering. There are solutions that you can install that will filter the whole house in one shot. There are solution after solution, but you're not going to get to those solutions if you're not interacting with us. So with that, I'd like to end and say thank you very much once again to all those involved who put this together. I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me. And an admonition to everyone who's watching, please, after you finish this, get up, decide to make a change, and reach out to TAG and to those schools so that you are involved. Thank you very much.